back to biotech. Then here we are going to see the second chapter about the cell, the basic unit of life. In the last class we studied about the what is science. The beginning chapter in the 8th class, what is science, we discussed. Then here we are going to see the cell, basic unit of life. See the cell, basic unit of life. Why we are calling cell is a basic unit of life? Because every living organism which is made up of by the cell. Suppose the sperm cell is one of the unicell, whereas ovum cell is single cell. When both are fused together, there is zygote is formed. So like this, if these two gametes are not fused together, the life cannot be achieved. But if the two single cell gametes are fused together, there will be formation of a life. So like that, a single cell, it can able to produce the life when both are fused together. So like that, every living organism life begins with a single cell, whereas sperm cell and ovum cell both are single cells, but though when both are fused together, there will be formation of a life. So like that, cell is a basic unit of life. Suppose example, an amoeba is a single celled organism, whereas a bacteria is a single celled organism, paramecium is a single celled organism, and from the small microscopic organisms to the huge living organisms like blue whale, conifers, their life is also began from the single cell. So that either some living organisms we can see directly on the earth, some of them microscopic in structure, we cannot see them, we can see through the microscope. So either visible or non-visible, every living organism, its life begins with a single cell. But only the living organism, the cell is not applicable is virus. The virus cell, it is not applicable to the cell theory or cell word or cell structure. It is something different from the cell. Okay, that we will study in the other classes, but here especially we are going to study about the introduction of the cell, how the cell is called as a basic unit of life. Here we are going to see. So cell is the basic unit of life because every living organism life begins with a single cell, from the small microorganisms to the huge blue whale or conifers. This all the living organisms are made up of with a single cell. So before the 350 years ago, there was no proper knowledge about these living organisms, but when the microscopy is invented into the world, so the research on the living organism was started. So here there were three most important scientists we have mentioned regarding the discovery of the life on the earth. See, the first one is Athanasius Kircher. Athanasius Kircher, his lifetime is, his research is 1601 to 1680, whereas John Swammerdam 1637 to 1680, and whereas Anthony van Leeuwenhoek 1630 to 1723, and whereas Robert Hooke. So there were several scientists who contributed their knowledge and their life to discovery of the cells and living organisms. Then we will study here. First one, here we are going to see the discovery of cell. First one, the discovery of the cell. Hooke. The first time cell is discovered by Robert Hooke in the year of 1665. First time the cell is discovered by the Robert Hooke in the year of 1665. So Robert Hooke, he is one of the England scientist. Okay, he studied some cells. He took the bark of the oak tree plant. He took the bark of the oak tree plant and he observed under the microscope. When he observed the bark in the microscope, he could have seen several different types of cells in the bark. So this bark is especially similar to or resemble to the honeycomb. The bark of the oak tree plant, which is similar to the honeycomb like structure. Suppose in honeycomb we can see different types of cells like this. Okay, see, So this type of cells he had seen in the bark of the oak tree plant. So these several small rooms he had seen in the bark of the oak tree plant. This every small little room, every small little room he called as a cell. Generally cell is a Latin word which means a little room. Cell, it is a Latin word. The cell, it is a Latin word which means a little room. So this bark of the oak tree plant, when he kept under the microscope and when he observed, he had seen this type of structures inside the bark. These specialized structures, these several small little rooms in the bark of the oak tree plant, this every little room he called as a cell. Cell means here, cell is a one of the Latin word which means a little room. So this every little room he called as a cell. So like this, first time in the history the cell was discovered by Robert Hooke in the year of 1665. Then after, this is about the non-living cell. Okay, this is about the non-living cell. First time the non-living cell is discovered by the what? Robert Hooke in the year of 1665. But at the same time, after few years, then here one more scientist who came forward and he observed the living cell whose name is Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. One more scientist, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, he is not basically a scientist, but he was a merchant, a cloth merchant basically. When he wants to find out the thickness of the cloth or thickness of the fiber, he has formulated a single lens microscope. That single lens microscope can magnify up to 300 times more. So like that, he had formulated a single lens microscope. Through this single lens microscope, his intention is to observe the fiber, thickness of the fiber. But at the same time, he was also observed some pond water under the microscope. When he collected some pond water and when he observed under the microscope, he could see different types of living organisms in the pond water like yeast, okay, bacteria, next protozoans. So like this, different types of living organisms he has been observed in the pond water. See, though he was not a scientist, but his curiosity is to observe the different living creatures in the water. He wants to find out whether there is some living creature in the water or not. So that curiosity is lead to the observing of these living organisms. So when he observed the pond water under the microscope, there were small creatures which are very microscopic in nature. There were small creatures. These small creatures are moving in the water. These small creatures were nothing but a protozoan or a bacteria or yeast cells. These are the different types of living organisms he had identified. And also he has identified the RBC of the human being. And also he also observed the RBC, red blood cells also he observed. So these are the different types of things he observed. So first time the living cell is observed by the Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. Basically he was a merchant, okay, who sells the cloths, but his intention is to identify the thickness of the fiber. But at the same time he also observed some small creatures which were in the water, which are not visible to our eye, or they are very microscopic. These microscopic living organisms in the pond water were observed by the Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. Then these living organisms, later he called them as animalcules. He called them as animalcules. The small living organisms in the pond water, he called them as animalcules. This is in the year of 1674. Microorganisms in the pond water like bacteria, protozoans, yeast cells, these are the small creatures when he observed in the year of 1674. These small creatures which were living in the or moving in the pond water, he called them as animalcules. These animalcules later he named as a bacteria. Okay, these animalcules he named as bacteria. First he observed the small creatures in the pond water in the year of 1674, but after the few years These animalcules were named as bacteria in the year of 1678. So like that, first living cell in the world was discovered by, first non-living cell is discovered by the Robert Hooke. At the same time, living cell is discovered by the Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. The non-living cell is discovered by the Robert Hooke by taking some bark of the oak tree plant. Generally bark means the outer layer of the plant. The epidermal layer of the plant is called bark. The several epidermal layers generally which is formed on the outer layer of the plant is called bark. Generally bark is a non-living tissue. There will be non-living cells. So like that we are saying the bark tissue cells are, the bark cell is a non-living cell. Non-living cell is observed by the Robert Hooke, whereas living cell is observed by the Anthony van Leeuwenhoek with the help of single lens microscope. So these living creatures, later he called them as animalcules. These animalcules also he called them as bacteria. So what are the different types of creatures were observed by the Anthony van Leeuwenhoek? First one is yeast cells, a single celled fungi, yeast is bacteria and protozoan, and also he observed the RBC. And the non-living cell is discovered by the Robert Hooke. Suppose if someone asked us the question, who discovered the cell for the first time? The cell is discovered by the Robert Hooke in the year of 1665. But the living cell specifically, if we want to say, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek discovered the living cell in the year of 1674. Okay, so this is about the small history regarding the cells and their discoveries. In the coming class, we shall observe how these cells are. What is the plant cell? What is the animal cell? What is their shape? Where is the nucleus is located? How the plasma membrane is? How the cell wall is? So everything we will study